Thank you. Okay, great. Good afternoon. Finance Committee meeting will begin. And first piece of business, I would like to deputize the two board members that are here today for the Finance Committee, and that will be Dr. Jim Martin and Ms. Karen Carter, Mrs. Karen Carter. So I would like to do that right now, so we will have a quorum to start the meeting. At this time, we only have myself, Dr. Martin, Ms. Carter here. No one is online as of yet, but we've changed the meeting time this week, so it's a lot of people had to make some adjustments. Actually, the two that are here made big adjustments, I know, to get here. So I appreciate that as well. We are going to begin our agenda, but prior to that, I wondered if we could have a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting.
Motion to approve?
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. Thank you very much. So we will begin right now. Thank you, Mr. Winters, for being here.
Thank you, Ms. Cash. And the agenda, I think in assembly has been adjusted. We flipped the staff compensation to the first item, and we'll do the budget the second item. So today we have two presentations shared with the committee. First, Dr. Matillo will share information staff has prepared on scenarios to locally fund support staff compensation changes. This presentation will also provide estimated costs for each scenario. The second presentation will provide additional information on the House and Senate proposed budget. At our last meeting, David Nieder shared information on the compensation piece of the proposed budget. And today, Terry Kimsey will provide additional information on other non-compensation items. So I will turn it over to Dr. Matillo to share information on compensation.
Good afternoon, and thank you for adjusting schedules to be here with us in person. Also want to introduce Marcy Holland and Darren Levine from HR. They've also been instrumental in thinking through some of these scenarios, and Darren in running some of these numbers that we have today. So I may call on them for some specific questions as needed. But we're here today. Make sure the slides do get up. Great. We're here today to review first a little bit of the history of the support staff compensation schedules, discuss the background of the $35 million that we have set aside for improving support staff compensation over the next few years, and to show a couple of scenarios to provide context on what it might take to increase that compensation. If we can advance a couple slides there. Great. We've discussed our staffing challenges in the last several months during many work sessions and board meetings. Compensation is a significant factor in many of the employee groups that we have discussed. While we specifically highlighted several groups such as IAs, CNS staff, bus drivers, substitute teachers, compensation continues to be a concern and a challenge among many of our employee groups. Next slide here, you will see a table of vacancy rates that include our instructional assistants, bus drivers, CNF staff, but also maintenance and operations, as well as some of our central services administrators. It's important to note that our M&O category often includes some of those skilled trades that we have within our organization, so vacancy rates there, as well as all of the different employee groups really impact the operations at our school buildings. The next few slides that I'll share with you provide a bit of a context on state legislated compensation changes. You can see in this slide from 0405 to about 2009, the state legislated and funded somewhat meaningful increases for our support staff employees. And then on this next slide here, you'll see that once the Great Recession hit, understandably, there was not an increase that year, but since that time, bless you, Senator Moore, since that time, we have had very few raises, and when they have been, they've generally been at much lower levels than we saw prior to the recession, so that's important to point out. So this next example here will this slide just includes those two previous slides all in one place if you want to look at the prior or pre-recession to post-recession there. But this next slide will show you an example of a particular employee, and this one is the instructional assistant example. They're paid at a grade 18, same as a CNS manager would be paid, although it is important to note that during many of the years I just showed you, IAs were reduced to 99.3 months or 93%. So even this example, if you wanted to take a specific IA versus another grade 18 employee, those numbers would actually be a bit lower. But it does help to illustrate what the impact of sort of the lack of increases that we've seen. And while in the next slide I will show that we've had some local support, you can see the impact on a particular instructional assistant. For example, the starting salary for an IA was $11.28 in 2008. And then that increased 52 cents over a 12-year period. And then that equated to a $901.30 increase. And again, this is not an annual increase. This is over the 12 years. So if we broke that down annually, we would look at $75.10 or $7.51 per year. So all that to say, the result of the sort of the lack of increase from the state and a little bit that we've done locally has not had a big impact on an instructional assistant, for example. And again, this is just an example. There are other employee groups who also who would not have seen a significant increase. Again, this talks about some of the local assistance that we have been able to provide. For example, in 15-16 as well as 19-20, we provided a 3% increase for all employees with local dollars. And then in January 2020, we increased our bus driver salaries to the minimum of $15 an hour. So we've been able to do that locally in the past few years. And when you look at, again, the previous example, it'd be hard to argue that this has made a substantial impact on the salaries of many of our employees. So that's really part of the reason why the board has committed to $35 million multi-year initiative to increase support staff compensation. And it's on the, there we go. And we have set aside $10 million for this current year with $5.2 million each of the next 3 years. Also, just as important to note, the last couple years of that initiative, we were able to provide 1.5, we were able to provide the 3% increase as well as the bus driver increase. And it's also important to note here that this plan that the board approved and set aside was intended to supplement the state budget and state increases. It was never intended to get us to any kind of minimum wage. I don't think we ever intended that we could do that with the money that was set aside. So if you advance to the next slide, please. So really, in response to your concerns and concerns that I share as the head of HR over vacancies and salaries, we've started to think about some different scenarios that we could implement in order to increase our compensation. So if you move to the next one. So this is what a scenario could look like for our support staff. So you can see, and this is completely local funding. I mean, I've heard a couple times that we need to look at what would it take locally? What could we do in absence of any state increases to ensure that we get our employees to where we want them? So in this slide, you can see $13 an hour in year one we could do, and then year two, $15 an hour, and then the next year would be $17.33 an hour, and all of that would be without addressing compression. So we would essentially just take, in year one, for example, any employee who's making less than $13 an hour and bring all of those employees to the $13 an hour mark. And then by year four, we would address compression across all of our employee groups. So if you move to the next slide. So the numbers aren't quite random. We did have some basis for why we chose these. The $13 an hour, for example, was mentioned in both the House and the Senate versions of the budget, and I think Ms. Kimsey will probably go into that later on as well. One of the chambers did also have 15 an hour over the next couple years, so we figured we would look at a 15 an hour. And then the 17.33 an hour comes from the Wake County government, their targeted minimum pay. And it's been interesting to just see, even I think over the past couple months, conversation used to kind of be about a $15 an hour minimum wage. And just in reading things, it looks like that has moved even higher to 15. So I think there's some value to looking at a number like a 1733 to see what it would take locally for us to get there. So if you can advance to the next slide. So here are some dollar figures, again, of what it would take each of the years to get to those different minimums, and then ultimately at the end of the year to address compression. So you can see, those different figures there. And again, it would be in that year 4 where we would address all the compression for all the different bands. And this is independent of any state increases that we would see. Obviously, if the state did approve a $13 an hour increase, for example, we would have money toward some of these dollar figures that you see here, although it would also cost us a little bit of local dollars because we do have locally funded employees that are not always included in those increases.
And we should understand these as cumulative numbers, right? In other words, that 12 million for year 1 needs to get added to the 27 million.
Actually, no, and that's a good point, Dr. Martin. So this would be from our current budget. So, and the reason we did it this way, so if we wanted to look, for example, at $15 an hour, it would be 27 million in comparison to our current budget for this year. So that total cost would be the 98 million that you see.
If we had $98 million tomorrow, we could do all of this next year.
We could do, yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. All right, to move to the next slide. Yeah, and this just provides some of the details that I already sort of went through, but in years without addressing compression, many employees would not see a change except for the fact that on their current pay scales, they might see a small increase, but they wouldn't see a large increase with the compression. And it's also important just to note here that this is not a recommendation that we are bringing to you today. I think what I've heard from a lot of you is we want to start seeing some scenarios. We want to start talking about some numbers. I even heard, I think, one board meeting, let us know what you need. So that's kind of an answer to some of those comments that you've made at the board table. Certainly, I think in the next slide shows next steps. We will continue to monitor the state budget. I know there's some frustration about waiting, but it does have an impact on what we do and what we're able to increase for our employees. So that's sort of, I think that kind of covers the presentation from the employee compensation piece. I'm happy to answer questions. Superintendent Moore?
So I just want to expand on something that was in an earlier slide about the multi-year plan initiative not ever really being designed to cover the landscape of what was needed. That the multi-year plan was designed with regards to compensation with an understanding and maybe hope that the legislature would continue or would find its way towards legislating some increases for staff. And I think that what we've heard from the board most recently, as those legislative increases have not materialized, is exactly what you've gotten today. What would it take to do this absent legislative action so that we have an understanding of what those numbers are and to start planning for that? And I think that it's important to note that these would be local dollars absent of state legislation that increased salaries for these folks in central office staff or non-certified staff and those things that we've talked about here today. And in particular, the $35 million focusing on our lowest paid, hardest to fill positions. The number you've heard today, that $98 million, would take us to where we think we need to be, which would be on par with what Wake County government is offering as an hourly salary for its employees, and deal with the compression issue as well. So I think it's a really good starting point in terms of understanding what that local request and how we begin to bite that elephant off.
Just to clarify, thank you for that, Superintendent Moore, that was helpful. Just assuming no legislative support, which I do, so to bring our all non-certified, non-central office staff to $16 an hour right away, it'd be around $30 or $35 million, somewhere between the 27 and 51, I guess. I mean,
Are you saying 16 an hour?
yeah, I just threw in another number for you.
Thanks for that.
Because
Yeah.
that's what I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can ballpark it that way. We would have to run the scenario because there's lots of factors
I'm sorry,
behind
and
this.
you've done an excellent job of giving us so many scenarios. I don't even know why I would do that. I was just thinking of another county that I was. About 40 million, okay. Thank you so
Yep,
much.
sure.
Dr. Martin?
Thank you. So I got a couple of questions. You know, the $75 a year on average over the last 12 years is kind of, I was going to say impressive, but I think depressive is maybe a better word for it,
Right.
because that's not inflation-adjusted dollars, that's real dollars.
Right.
Roughly, how much has health insurance gone up? The employees' I mean, till you put your family on it, it goes even more than that. And I indirectly know because I pay for the same thing at NC State. But the employee contribution for health insurance, how is that compared to, say, the $75 a year?
Does anybody have those numbers?
And again, I'm not asking for
Sure.
an absolute, this is the right number, but ballpark.
Yeah, so the employer is taking on a lot of the major burden
Sure.
of the state insurance. The employees, the prices have remained fairly consistent. The coverage has been reduced. So you get into the details of what the deductibles are. That's where the employee is facing the biggest cost. So this doesn't sound right, but if you don't use it, it isn't an increased cost as much because you're still paying like $25 for the 70/30 plan, I believe, right now. But your deductibles increase quite a bit, and then the employer cost has gone up quite a bit. And I think I presented this to you previously. You know, we're looking at from a $6,300 to almost a $7,000 per employee increase this year in the proposed budget.
So I was thinking even more the 80/20 plan, because 70/30 is marginal health insurance. It's better than nothing. But the 80/20, there's a big difference in what you're paying for that. But again, ballparkish, we're getting close to similar costs. And if you figure into the deductibles,
Yeah, and I also
Well,
think,
negative.
you mentioned this, there's, I believe, the range is 28% inflation over that time period. And you look at the increase in salary, how small that is, and then your buying power
right.
that you're reduced. So that's another factor to put in.
Right. So that was mainly just some comments to try to put things in perspective. This $75 a year is really nothing. With 28% inflation over that time, it really is going backwards. So I appreciate these scenarios that you've put together for us. And I do think addressing salary compression the whole way along is critical, because partly because even if we want to have a 4 or 5 year budget plan, budgets are such a year-by-year process that, right, this board could make one decision, but a next board could change that. So if you put off dealing with compression down the road, then you probably are really disadvantaging an awful lot of people. So I would encourage us, whatever we do, to look at those together.
Yep.
You know, we've all pointed out that it is frustrating that LEA employees are not treated like state employees, are not treated like county employees. We shouldn't even be having this conversation. But we are where we are, so we have to be having this conversation. If I take that $98 million one of the last sort of ballpark rules of thumb that I heard was that for every 1 cent of property tax in Wake County, that generates about $1.5 million. So on that, no, it was more than that. It's 10 million, 10. Right, right. 1 cent is about 15. So my number in my head is a dime is 150 million.
Yeah, it might be actually close to 16 now with the revenue.
Right. So just for easy figuring, a dime is 150 million. A dime of property tax is 150 million, which means that 98 million would be somewhere between 6 and 7 cents of property tax. Now, I don't like property tax any more than anybody else does, except I do like what our property tax pays for. Therefore, I am willing to pay my taxes if they're invested appropriately. And I think investing in our people, in our school system, is exactly what we should be doing. So 6 to 7 cents, if I calculate it right, for a $500,000 home is $350 a year. Now, I know the county commissioners are not going to be interested in listening to a 6 to 7 cent tax increase, but I'm not sure we shouldn't be asking for that, because we've been talking around this for forever. We should not have to do this locally. The state should be picking up this tab. They're not. If we think about ourselves as a business, which I think we are, right? We're a different kind of business than, say a manufacturing company or a pharmaceutical company, but we're a business. We can't run we can't run a business with a personnel structure that simply underpays our employees and makes our employees basically work for free, which is what we're doing. And so, I look at the 98 million. Yes, that sounds like a big number, but for a population in Wake County, for being one of the wealthiest counties in the state, that's $350 in property tax if you own a $500,000 home. The average home in Wake County, I think, is like $350,000. So that means you're talking about maybe $200 a year on your property tax. Would take care of this. We can do it. Now, we can't just as a school board levy the tax, but I think we can make the case, and we need to make the case to our county commissioners. So that's a little bit more of a statement than it is a question, but I wanted to put it in context because this is a doable number if we're willing to commit to doing it. And I think it's a must, and I think what we're seeing right now with the employment shortage is that it's not really an option. We're either going to do it or we're going to fail.
Yep.
And failure is not an option. A question I have is, there is the various CARES money. We've, as a board, decided to put the additional $10 million toward a step in this direction, which is roughly 10% of your 98 million. So it's a small step in the right direction. But there's a lot more CARES money out there. The downside of that is it's one-time money. And salaries need to be recurring budgets. It's not a good idea to put salaries onto one-time money. I get that. At the same time, to ask the commissioners to, in next year's budget, all of a sudden come up with $98 million, while possible, right? That's not a crazy tax hike. People will scream, but it's not a crazy tax hike. $200 to $300 to your property tax is not going to break most people in Wake County up. But that's still not going to happen. But what if we would use some of that CARES money, that one-time CARES money, to begin that transition process? We could then take some more robust action right away. Granted, that will put pressure on the state, on the county, to down the road make up for whatever we did. But not putting pressure on is obviously not getting this job done, right? We've been talking about doing something related to this for the decade that I've been on the board. And it's only been tweaking around the edges, and that's because as a board, all we can do is talk and request. We have no ability to raise funds. But could we not use some of that CARES money, that one-time money, to take a bold action? And yes, it is a little bit forcing the hand, I recognize that, but I think we need to do some forcing the hand so that 3 to 5 years down the road, the state or the county is going to have to either say, oh, we're cutting all that money, or come up with it. Maybe it's a bold action, but I'm ready for bold action because this has gone on too long. This is unsustainable.
So if I could just riff off of where you're headed. What I have talked to some of our leadership about is looking at our request for funding for the commissioners in the next few years, adding this as part of a multi-year plan strategy and messaging it as a separate component, because I think one of the things makes it more complicated in Wake County, and you heard me say this when we started talking about the multi-year plan, was that it was a blessing in disguise that our growth was slowing, because for the past 20 years, the needs for dollars related to growth has taken all the air out of the room with regards to how much we could request from the county. Other counties that don't have growth can make greater progress towards using local dollars to pay non-certified and hourly staff than Wake County has been able to prioritize because of the amount that we're talking about, because growth was sucking the air out of the room for us. And so, unless we were asking for $75 million every year, which has never happened, our growth needs were $30 million minimum. And so the slowdown in growth, I think, can help with prioritizing how we could spend local dollars in a different way. And then I would say the other shoe that has dropped that doesn't help is how the state has approached some of the what we call unfunded mandates or legislative mandates that come down from the state, where some costs have been pushed down to the local level that in the past the state took care of. And I would be happy to let Mark talk more about some of those, because I know he knows what those are. And so that has increased the responsibility for things that we have no choice about, like the retirement contribution, I believe, is one of those. We don't have a choice about paying that, so we have to add local dollars to our budget request to do that, because there is no choice. We have to add local dollars request for growth, new schools. We have no choice about that. And so once you start adding all that up together, the numbers start getting really large if you're looking at this additional piece as well. It's why we have been limited in the amount that we've been able to do with local salary increases. But our local salary increases, the limited amount that we've been able to do, nevertheless far outpaces what the state has done. And so we need to continue that work. And I think if our number of growth of students is leveling off, that does provide more space for this. And in the next budget cycle and moving forward, how we diversify our multi-year plan to be more explicit about some things and separate them could be a helpful strategy for how we do this, so that the commissioners are fully aware of what we're doing. Notwithstanding what we might use ESSER funds for, or over, under, or other things, and you're exactly right, Dr. Martin. Using those for recurring needs is a gamble. And one we'll be talking more about in the next couple months as we bring you our final budget.
Ms. Carter, then Ms. Scott. And I'd like to mention that Ms. Scott and Ms. Johnson-Hausler joined us in person, and Chair Sutton is online. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing this, because I know I've kind of really wanted a specific plan. So it's nice to see something out there, not necessarily a recommendation yet, not there, but at least something giving us some idea about where we could go, just because I think it is very important for our staff to see a specific plan and know we are here and this is where we're going at the end of the multi-year plan. And I understand there are factors we can't control, but I think ensuring as long as we are making this a priority and doing what we can to make it happen. And I just wanted to add, because the salary compression, I do agree. I worry just because retention, I think, is very important. And so many of our staff have been through so much, and we have done bonuses for those coming on and whatnot. And I feel like it is very important that all of our staff, the non-certified staff, even those who, may be past whatever mark we may set, have some type of salary increase. So I do agree that the salary compression, I would like to see what it would take to begin to address that right out the gates. And for me, I just feel like it's to the point now where to be competitive, because there are other counties who are significantly bypassing us, not by a little bit, but if someone can go somewhere and make $30 more plus a day, that's huge. And so in order for Wake County to stay competitive, we are now to the point where either we do this or, there are going to be other implications that we will continue to have to face. So I don't really have a question other than, I do agree about the salary compression, and I do appreciate seeing some type of parameters and specifics that we can start to look at, because I think it's really where we have to head now.
Yep.
So appreciate it.
Thanks, Ms. Carter.
Thank you. I'm curious how this will impact CNS. I know that the county so far has assisted with their salaries, because when we say we're increasing, all employees will have a minimum of, $15 per hour, for example. That does impact child nutrition services as they operate as an enterprise. And I know I still try to learn exactly how that works. And I think to the general public, they aren't certain. And I know that in the past, that burden has fallen to the children buying lunches in order to raise funds. So I don't know if you could help just answer that question again, how they operate and how we've been assisting them right now, given that there's the federal grant for the free breakfast and lunches.
Yeah, so Child Nutrition is an enterprise fund, and the theory behind an enterprise fund is that it pays for itself. All revenue stays there, and expenditure should be within the budget. Years ago, our child nutrition program was operating, and I won't say with a profit, but with some excess revenues. When probably over the past 3 or 4 years, all child nutrition programs in the state started struggling because, the good news is a healthy food push. The tough news is that healthy food costs more. And so you either had to raise prices, jump prices up quite a bit. But we were still in a good position in Wake County Public Schools. Of course, then last year hit, and we struggled greatly. So luckily, we took some of the ESSER funding and we supported child nutrition. Well, actually, it was CARES Act funding, and we supported child nutrition. The county shared $15 million with us, and because we were helping feed the community, we used $5 million of that county funding to help support child nutrition. We placed all administrative salaries within child nutrition and within our local budget. So in total, it was probably $12 million, maybe $12 to $13 million that we assisted child nutrition. And it was different last year because you did not have as many students in the school buildings, and certainly not for a long time. So this year, we will see. We're operating on their own at the moment. But to the point of, if you increase salaries 20%, you've all of a sudden increased the expenditures within child nutrition. So either child nutrition, in order to make revenue, will have to increase prices or have some kind of federal grant or even a state grant that could assist, or we're going to have to carry some of that expense with local dollars. And I believe the figures that Dr. Matillo shared with you included child nutrition as a local expense. It did not pull those out of the numbers. And there may be, some way we do both. Maybe they can afford X amount and we cover Y amount in Fund 2. So the program itself is in okay shape today because of the assistance last year. We'll see how this year's moves forward and what our revenues look like. You saw the vacancies in child nutrition. I mean, this is a bad way to look at it, but it means that their expenditures are down. So, we've got to find a way to hire the people so they're working, and then we'll need to look at the funding and see what kind of funding we will need to support locally.
I appreciate that, and absolutely, with the vacancies, and that has a real impact on some of our schools where, when we talk about equity, if a certain cafeteria at a school does not have as many people, even though Ms. DeLuca is doing an outstanding job at sending people from central office to assist with those, it's still not quite the same. So I do appreciate that information, but we know it's a struggle. I'm concerned about that. I want to make sure we support CNS. The work they do is so critical. And then I did share a presentation, a living wage presentation. So I'm not sure where the county has been discussing that, if that's been something they've been discussing in their committees. But and I'm saying that to sort of piggyback off Dr. Martin, that I feel like the county is supportive of assisting the benefits of having, truly living wages for folks has benefits that just help our economy overall in so many ways.
I think that presentation was about the entire county, the state of the county and the benefits, but it also was a precursor to their own budget process where they raised salaries for their hourly employees as well. So it provided some context for that.
Okay. I feel like the information in there from Duke Public Policy and NC Cooperative was just, it was some really good information. So I appreciate the work. And as a single board member, I absolutely support this. It's heartbreaking to hear of folks leaving and going to work in other counties when they live in Wake and they love Wake County, but they have to pay their bills. And this is just one of the ways that we can tell people you are valuable, you are respected, and we need you.
Yeah.
Thank you. One follow-up probably maybe for you, Mr. Winters. Thank you for mentioning for CNS around grants. And I guess you and I've had this conversation multiple times, but I'm curious, have we started to look at the impact with the pandemic ongoing, looking to ensure that we still offer universal breakfast and lunch? And if the first question is, are those grants still available at this time? And then second, what's the actual impact since CNS is an enterprise? Financially to CNS as an enterprise when we use universal?
We are reimbursed for the meals. So we have revenue coming in. It will be at a greater amount than it was last year. Last year, we had very little revenue. I mean, we probably ran at about a third of our normal revenue throughout the year. And really, in September, we do a quarterly report to sort of see where we are. There's a required report, which still is only a full, 6 weeks maybe of school. So we will look at the numbers when they come in. I can't really answer this year, but I will tell you last year, we probably brought in about 33% of the revenue from a normal year. So what I was telling you we did with the other funding source was cover the expenditures. So the whole program looked like it ran at about a third of the size last year than it's running in normal years.
And just to extend that a bit, so schools that have in the past received universal breakfast continue to do so. And you may recall that some of that is facilitated through some additional funds that the county commissioners have provided to ensure that the delta between providing the universal breakfast and CNS taking a loss is covered. And I don't know if it covers the whole thing or not, but there are some dollars there. So expanding that, or even continuing it, all of it, the revenues that are brought in impact it, but the commissioners are continuing to provide. That is part of our budget now.
Right. And I think Mark knew I'm asking about those that are not a part of the food security budget piece. I think that's what you were answering me, right? Because those are completely separate, because the one that you're talking about have been in place for a couple of years now. So,
I will also say that we are also reviewing right now whether or not we have some schools that may be eligible for the community eligibility provision. So we review that every year as well. So we're looking at that now also.
that was my second question, so you answered my second follow-up. Because again, I mean, we watched, especially rural and other smaller districts take advantage of that. So that was my follow-up to some of those schools who are not an existing cohort, if you will, of the food security budget that we included for the universal breakfast. So thanks for adding that question. And then Dr. Martin said it all. I will only echo. I am a school board member who personally, given, as Ms. Carter noted, the staff transitions that we're watching other people go to districts, money is one, but the other thing is they also need to hear us say that we value them in the midst of a horrible time for educators and our support staff now. And a part of that for me is agreeing with Dr. Martin that I would, as a person who runs an organization, I would never say use one-time money for salary, but I will say that the most common used word in 2020, these are unprecedented times. And I do think that we have to be bold to say to our employees that we do care and we do see that it's tough. And, you know, like Dr. Martin, being a family who've watched our health insurance be on the rise, and not the care, which is clearly not a school system issue, but it is an issue for us as an employer. So while we don't control what the General Assembly does with and what the Treasury Office of State Treasurer does with our benefits, it directly impacts us because we are employers to those individuals who are getting hit monthly in addition to low wages. So I definitely want to echo Dr. Martin's sentiments.
Do we have any other comments? Does Chair Sutton have anything that he was asking? If not, quick question.
Not at this time. I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. So the food security plan, I'm not sure, I mean, I'm aware of it, but I'm not totally sure what the county commissioners, so how many schools and what is qualifications to be a part of that? And then the county commissioners, I'm sorry, I know you have this on top of your head. Yeah, that's it.
I'm waiting for Mr. Luca to like
But
pipe down
I
from
didn't,
somewhere.
I don't think I knew that as well, and I didn't realize what the commissioners were counting.
I'm not sure if it's 10 or 12 that we receive funds for, and somewhere in the vicinity of 20 to 25 that we're doing it with. And so I think, you know, that's my recollection, but I will confirm. I don't believe that the commissioner is supporting all with funds, but some. And so, but I think the total is it's around 25.
And that is, they qualify by?
They have a universal breakfast program where all students are offered breakfast on a daily basis, and it's not without charge. And those schools were chosen based on, and we did, I mean, I remember looking at the chart. It was a combination of the percent of students that were free and reduced lunch status at the school, how many students were currently paying full price, what their participation rate was, and combining those numbers helped us come up with either the ability to offer the universal program and what the cost would be to the district, and that is how the commissioners determined how much they would provide.
Okay, thank you. I'd heard good things about it. I just wasn't real familiar with it. Any other board members have a question on that? So with the bus drivers, the percent of vacancies that we had in bus drivers, we hit a point where we then began to contract out some of those services. Do we know what percent of vacancies caused us to contract out our transportation? And I didn't know if CNS was coming to they're at a 20% vacancy. I didn't know if we had some options for contracting services.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there was a specific number. I think a lot of our folks who we might turn to are experiencing some of the same kinds of vacancies in
They
their
are, I'm
organizations.
sure.
So, yeah.
But, and I'm not saying not to, I mean, I want to clarify, this is not in place of dealing with the salary adjustments and compression schedules and all that we should do as an employer to do better by our employees. I just didn't know if in the short term, if this board chose not to do one-time funding, which I'm fairly supportive of as one board member, to get us out of the shortage areas, but I know it brings all kinds of problems with it. But, so again, I want to clarify, it's not to replace what we're trying to do for those CNS employees. I just didn't know in the short term for shortages, because I do know that the shortages are really making our administrators struggle even more in our schools as they have to bring meals to classrooms and things, and we're already getting ready to hit a shortage of administrators pretty soon if we don't deal with it. So I just wanted to throw that out there if we ever looked at that as well.
Yeah, and I don't know specifically if transportation has, I mean, I know we use it for some of our transportation needs, but I don't think they have a plan to look at that just based on the number of vacancies and the availability of contractors out there.
Any other questions from our board or any additions?
Well, not so much question, but I'll just reiterate the comment that I really hope that we can actually take some action, because we've been talking around this for a very long time, long before COVID hit. We do have good partners in our commissioners. I don't disagree with that at all. And yet, at some point, I mean, you look at our budgets, as Superintendent Moore noted, we're covering growth. And we're really barely scratching the surface on these heavy lifts. And so something's going to have to be different. Like they say, if you just repeat the same things that didn't work, hoping that they're going to work the next time, that's kind of the definition of a fool. And I don't think we want to be a fool. So, we need to think about what are we going to do different. Muriel Summers retired, but the foundation of Combs Elementary was always begin with the end in mind, right? What's our end? Our end is to have an employment personnel structure that actually can give us a viable business. That means we care about our employees. That means we care about the organization. That means that we're actually able to get the job done. So if we begin with the end in mind, we can't sit here and say, oh, we just can't do it because the funds are not available, right? That's what we've been doing for more than a decade. We can't repeat that because we know what action that will take. So I think it's time for bolder action, and maybe we use, maybe we use some of the CARES ESSER funds. I don't like to use one-time funds for this, but maybe we use that to leverage a transition. We've got to do something different because we've got to get to a different place.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. That is well said. I mean, I love bold action. So, and I know sometimes I can't say it better than you. So thank you, Dr. Martin. That was very well said. All right. I guess we'll move on to our next part. Thank you, Dr. Matillo, for that good presentation. And
Good
your
afternoon.
staff as well. I appreciate your staff. They're here. I like that.
Good afternoon. I'll wait for the PowerPoint to be loaded. At the August Finance Committee, we presented an overview of staff compensation proposals. So today, we're going to review the other highlights in the state and House budgets, the Senate and House budgets that are the non-compensation items. Go to the next slide. The first item is the ADM hold harmless provision that's in the Senate version of the budget. And it would provide that the state board would not reduce allocations to school districts if there's a discrepancy between our actual student membership and our anticipated average daily membership. So if this were approved, if our second month average daily membership figures are less than what the state projected in our initial allotments, they would hold us harmless this year. And then there would be a required report due by January showing that information to the legislature. Next slide. For children with disabilities, there are provisions in both the Senate and the House budget. They're a little bit different. Both include the same dollar value per head count and a 12.75% cap, which is no change from the current year. The Senate budget includes $40 million of non-recurring money that would go to school districts that enroll more exceptional children during the first 2 months of the school than the state had anticipated with the April head count. The House budget recommends in the second year of the budget, 22-23, to increase the funding cap from 12.75% to 13%. It also has a $40 million reserve of non-recurring funds for next year that would be used for children with disabilities or ADM or both that exceed their initial predictions during the first 2 months of the year.
Ms. Kimsey, can you clarify? Last I remember checking for sure, we were right around 12.5%.
I believe,
Children with
for-
disabilities, where are we? And would this 12.75, 13 make any difference to us?
It would not, because at 2021, our head count was 18,463 students, and compared to our second month average daily membership, we were at 11.7%.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Next slide. These are three provisions that are in the House version of the budget. The House would delay implementation of the class size requirements for kindergarten classes. It wouldn't change the funding that's in the budget. It's just a change to the maximum number of students in the classroom. So if the kindergarten average daily membership for month 1 is 5% more than the first month of 2019-20, the average class size for kindergarten should not exceed 1 to 20, and an individual class should not exceed 23. Without that provision, we would be under the current status, which is that at kindergarten, our maximum per class would be 21, and the average wouldn't exceed 18. So it's allowing a few more students in kindergarten for 1 year. The House budget also includes a provision to have the program enhancement teacher allocation apply to K-12 and be at a ratio of 1 teacher per 140 students, whereas the budget this year without this provision had a K-5 program enhancement allocation at 1 to 191. And that provision was built into your proposed budget, but this would be different. This would change that to K-12.
It would be helpful.
Yes. The state defines program enhancement to be a list of approved courses: arts, music, dance, drama, PE, health, world languages. The place we're hitting a little snag in our district is some of our schools offer other electives that aren't within those exact categories. They may be technology-based or some others. So we have submitted to the Department of Public Instruction requesting that they take to the state board and look at some of our other courses that some of our schools use for electives to see if it could be within that program enhancement definition, because the law says it could be other courses approved by the state board. So that's the only place we've hit a little ripple.
Ms. Kimsey, you noted that the current is 1 to 191. 1 to 140 sounds like a really good change
Yes.
from 1 to 191.
Yes.
But you noted
But
that
it's-
the 1 to 191 was K-5.
Yes.
This is K-12, and we tend to have more, I think,
Yes.
program enhancement in the
Yes, if
high
you-
school. So
Yes.
how much of this does it look good? If you looked at our current K-12 program enhancement ratio, I think it's lower than the 1 to 191. Do we know what it is?
We have not run calculations on this figure until we see if it's going to be certain.
Sure.
Our current allocation for K-5 for program enhancement is more aggressive than the state. So that also caused a little complication where we're having to put some of those additional teachers that we have as program enhancement on local, where I may have had them before on state, just based on how we try to maximize use of resources. So I have not analyzed this particular provision if we went. But there are a lot more courses when you think about all the world languages,
Right.
the health, physical education, all of those courses at our middle and high schools. It's different than the K-5 electives.
So it is probably right to assume that it's not as much better as 191 to 140, but it still may be an improvement. Okay, thank you.
The third item is remote instruction for COVID-19 emergencies. The House budget indicates that a public school unit may make day-to-day decisions on remote learning due to COVID, resulting in teacher shortages or student quarantines. And then we would report those to the state within 72 hours. Next slide. The House budget includes a provision for planned virtual instruction. It limits the number of students participating in virtual instruction to no more than 15% of total student enrollment. And I think right now we're at about 6%. Public school unit must have a virtual instruction plan and submit that to the state. And no unit shall use virtual instruction to satisfy the minimum required number of instructional days or hours after June of 2022, so after this year, without express authorization from the General Assembly, except for a district that assigns a school code to have a virtual school as an option. So we are doing a program now that this would be different. So it changes after this year.
If virtual instruction continues beyond this school year, it will be a separate school and not a program within a school. Next
slide. The Senate budget includes a provision for school psychologists. Right now, this district has always received an allocation for instructional support, and it's where our media specialists, counselors, social workers, a lot of the instructional support positions are paid. The Senate is recommending reducing that allotment for instructional support and transferring the psychologist piece to a separate program code and a separate allocation. And once that transfer occurs at the state level, there would be no transfer out. So it's separating the psychologist separate from the other instructional support positions. And their data is indicating there are 362 school psychologists statewide. I looked today, and Wake County School System has 119. So we've got a lot of the school psychologists. So I'm not sure how that formula would work if the Senate's trying to separate that into a separate allocation, because I don't think all school districts have like the same ratio. And so we'll have to see what that looks like.
Are we defining things differently? Because surely we don't have almost a quarter of the psychologists in the whole state, do we?
This is, well, I'll say the 362 that they are indicating, this was on the state's summary, were the ones that were state funded in that particular allocation. There are more school psychologists over all the different funding sources. I think there's a later slide we'll get to in a minute that may show that.
So our 119 are across all funding sources, or are they all state?
Yeah, and a lot of ours are on the state allocation, because it is it is a position allotment for instructional support, so we do put our most expensive positions in that allocation. It's beneficial to the district. All right, if we can go to the next slide. Both the Senate and the House budgets have an Exceptional Children Transportation Reserve Fund. The Senate has $3 million non-recurring. The House has $2.75 million recurring and another $0.25 million non-recurring. So that would be a special reserve to cover extraordinary transportation costs for high-needs children with disabilities attending LEAs and charter schools, and a transportation reserve for homeless and foster children to provide a grant program to cover these students as defined by McKinney-Vento. And then neither budget includes funding, except for that small recurring piece, in 2023. And there'll be a report required about that in March to the legislature. Next slide. The House budget revises operating balance restrictions for school nutrition. There's a study for the school nutrition program and indirect cost. No public school unit that provides child nutrition services shall assess an unrestricted indirect cost rate to a school nutrition program that is more than 8%. Next slide. Both the Senate and House budgets provide dollars for school connectivity, an increase of $4.6 million of recurring funds. School Technology Fund, they are adding $18 million funded from civil penalty and forfeiture. I'd like to mention on this one that last year, the state removed that $18 million from School Technology Fund to use for districts that were modernizing their business systems. This simply reinstates the $18 million that had been there before last year. We were able to handle that reduction last year because we knew that was coming last year, and we had some carryover dollars in school technology that helped us get through last year. So this is good that they're reinstating those funds back to the School Technology Fund.
But it is not new money.
It is not
in
new
the
money.
sense that it's an increase.
Right. Both budgets do include funds for K-12 business system modernization, $48.8 million non-recurring in 21-22, and $37.9 million in non-recurring in 22-23. Next slide. The Senate also has a provision requiring a report on instructional support personnel. The report's due October 15th, showing instructional support positions from all funding and LEAs. And they provided an example of what the chart would look like. So these are the figures the state showed in that example. And this is where it showed a little more detail on psychologists. So in this report, it's showing statewide school psychologists, 779 positions, and we have over 100. So this is just a reporting requirement, and that we would do by October. Next slide. The House budget this is lottery funds. The House budget appropriates $15 million to Smart Start, a program that funds a wide range of early childhood needs. It creates a $50 million fund for public school repair and renovations. Each county would receive an additional $500,000 per year, regardless of size or need. Next slide. The House and Senate budgets regarding lottery funds. The Senate adds $157.6 million recurring, and the House $110.3 million recurring for lottery funding grant programs for districts with new construction. It modifies the priority to expand to almost all counties, not just restricted to Tier 1 counties, and the special provisions differ between the two. And just a reminder that lottery funds are distributed primarily directly to the county as part of the county budget that supports our building program. So as an example, in fiscal year 20, the state provided for Wake County School System $11.8 million for school construction that went to Wake County government, and they apply it to our building program. But a lot of the lottery funds, and on our part for Wake County, over $40.4 million that year, the state applied it to the non-instructional support funding that we have for our clerical and custodial and other support positions in schools. So all of the lottery funds do not go to construction. A lot of it goes to support state funding formulas that had been in place.
And Terry, is it not also correct that the support staff funded through lottery funds prior to the lottery were funded through state funds?
Yes.
And they moved those positions to lottery dollars?
Yes. And there's also $2.6 million for Wake County's portion that is applied to our transportation allotment also from the lottery.
So they definitely weren't additional dollars given to us through the lottery. It was just taken from their already budgeted dollars. So
And in some cases, there were reductions to districts, for example, with instructional assistance. But it gave additional recurring dollars for the legislature to use for other purposes.
So the lottery doesn't help the LEA.
These additional dollars could help the county have additional dollars to support our building program. The new dollars that are proposed in the budget, yes. Next slide. The House budget clarifies the definition of year-round school, so you can see this change in language. If a local school administrative unit with both single-track and multi-track instructional calendars, a plan for a single-track instructional calendar that's identical to at least one track of the multi-track calendar meets the requirements for a year-round definition. So it's just changing some of the definitions for year-round. Next slide. We do not know when the state is going to approve a budget or if they will. We keep hearing different things that might happen. We hear that it could be the middle of October. Then we hear that maybe there won't be a budget and they will proceed with mini bills, as has happened in the past. So we don't know right now. We're watching it. We get updates from the Department of Public Instruction through webinars every other week. So we're following it closely, but I do not know when we will know what the state budget will be, or if they're going to move to mini bills, and then how quickly those could roll out in terms of compensation or other issues. Our plan is to bring you proposed compensation schedules following state action. That's really, we really need that piece of information to move forward there.
If I could just say a couple of quick things. So this comparison, which was done for a meeting that we thought we were going to have last week sometime, that provides some comparisons between what was in the House budget proposal, Senate budget proposal. Some of the items have already been addressed through Senate Bill 654, which passed both the House and the Senate and was signed into law by the governor. So the pieces, for example, around the year-round school definition has already been enacted through Senate Bill 654, which is now law. And some of the provisions of Virtual Academy and how it can operate next year or this year have already been signed into law with Senate Bill 654. So just wanted to provide that update.
So to clarify then, what we use this year for our single-track year-round will continue because they're part of a multi-track schedule. And then the Virtual Academy school will have to be a separate school.
Those two pieces are in 654 and are already done. So they won't need to be worked out in the conference for the budget because they're already in 654.
So we know
Correct.
we will plan on those.
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
That's the end of our presentation for today, right, Mr. Winters? Superintendent Moore, do you have anything more you want to add to some of the parts of what we had presented today?
I would just say that the piece that was presented by Dr. Matillo earlier on compensation was really taking a close look at our hourly certified staff. We have some needs outside of hourly certified staff in some of our trades and other areas, and we across all of the district in all of our positions. So I say that only because the $98 million that was sort of the bottom line for doing this work is a portion of our staff. And there are significant dollars that are needed and contemplated in other areas of our operations, like our trades or our certified staff, where there are needs. And so, as we contemplate a multi-year plan revision moving forward, we'll be looking at those other areas as well.
So what I kind of want to understand from the board is where we proceed from here, because if we leave it as just an information item where we see where we're standing, and I know that Dr. Barton, you said some things we need to be bold about, which I agree. Ms. Scott, do you want to add something?
I did. I just wanted to mention that, should the state, in a perfect world, really decide to go ahead and, fully fund Meet Leandro, et cetera, and where we have said this is the scenario for 13, 15, 17, I would love to see us not say, okay, they did it, so we're going to use that money somewhere else. I'd love to see us then go above and beyond that, then still commit to that amount of funding. Am I making sense? So I'm just, for the purpose of discussion, I just wanted to throw out my support for that, since this is kind of a discussion.
And that is a construct that we are working with, that we're laying out the total amount on the local dollar so that you can see what it is, irrespective of what the state or legislature will do with salaries, and that should the state move on salaries, that we would still be looking at, do we have a commitment from the board in our budget process for the amount of dollars that we're contemplating in any given year, that we would build into our budget process that would accelerate the timeline that we could reach that or even go beyond it.
And another point I just wanted to add, if that's okay, I know Vice Chairman Happy's not here, but I know she's expressed support for benefits, for additional benefits in terms of covering those as a district for employees. So I just wanted to, I don't want to speak for her, but I know that's sort of part of this discussion in terms of where employees, pay their own, what we could do as the employer to increase those.
Well, and I believe that, Mr. Winters and I talked a little bit about that as well. I mean, sometimes I think that our finance department weighs the service we get for our employees with the options that they have. And so we talked about that a little bit, right, Mr. Winters?
Yes, ma'am.
You feel real good about some of the service that we're getting from some of our benefit people that we're using now. We can explore that further.
Yeah, I think what Ms. Mahaffey was asking is that we actually cover the cost. For instance, do we cover the cost of the dental, which is $6 for an individual? Do we just cover that cost for that? I believe that's what you're speaking to, isn't it? And we looked at a couple of other areas. She even asked about some other insurance options, which become a little bit more pricey as we talk about that. Then it becomes a choice of salary versus coverage. And I think to your question, the next step, so we have these numbers that we shared with you today. So now you sort of have a sense of what the costs may be at different levels. I believe we need to wait for the state now. I mean, we're hoping in the next couple of weeks. We're hearing talk that somewhere in the next 2 weeks, of course, I heard this at mid-July and mid-August also, to see if the state takes action, because then that will free up funds to put on top of anything that the state did and to move forward. We have limited local dollars right now. We have the $10 million Dr. Matillo spoke of, but if we could get salary schedules, if this comes in the next 2 weeks, if it's longer than 2 weeks, then we'll have to make a decision whether we want to take a step somewhere, although it may be small, take a step somewhere. Because every fall we bring new salary schedules and any increases to employees, we bring that to you, but it's usually after the state budget is passed.
Did we look at the cost of free dental? I can't remember. We talked about it. We didn't actually get an amount, did we? I don't think so.
Doing some math in my head. It wasn't free dental. Dental for an individual is not that expensive. If you just do it for an individual, it's roughly $6 a month, so $60 to $72 a year per employee. That's not that expensive. If you let the employee take the family coverage and cover that, but you just do it by employee.
Ms. Carter?
Yeah, I guess for me, I understand waiting for the state for this year, but I, for one, would support, once we have that, then we go back and we have not only a plan for this year, like what we're looking at, but also the remainder of the multi-year plan. Because for me, I just think that's still important. I keep saying it, I know, but having a specific plan, and I understand we can't say that X, Y, and Z is going to happen, but if that's a priority, and may not be here, but if that is a commitment that at least those of us who are here now are making, our employees can see that that is what we're committed to, and that we are going to make that a true specific commitment versus a general, we'll raise what we can. So that's my thoughts on it. because I just think it's important to have a multi-year plan if you have a multi-year priority.
Well, it's interesting, we're hoping the budget gets passed prior to starting our next budget season. We're not far off starting our next budget season. We'll start that in November, right? So we'll start planning for the budget in the next season, and we certainly can put the numbers that you discussed today and start looking at that in a budget plan. It is a plan because we're not a taxing authority, so it's a plan, but we can certainly do that.
Dr. Martin?
Yeah, I do really appreciate going through this legislative budget. It helps us. I don't see anything in there that makes me say, oh, wow, it's actually going to do much. It really is sort of a sustaining, treading water budget, a few tweaks around the edges. You know, you all heard me before. I think it's time for us to be bold. And we know what the costs are going to be. So for what it's worth, sometimes a slogan can get catchy, and I'm going to say it's time to give a dime. It's past time to give a dime. A dime of property tax in Wake County would still keep us in the bottom quarter of taxation across the state. That'd be $150 million that we'd have to work with. That $150 million would give us the $98 million that we need for the non-certified staff. It would give us the money to work with for the skilled crafts. Let's not forget that our certified staff are not paid what they should as well. So it's time to give a dime. And if we gave a dime, we actually could make a real impact.
That was a very strong slogan in the 90s. That was exactly the slogan that went through at a meeting that a couple commissioners took repercussions for, but it was a very strong, bold stand by one county commissioner for sure, and all of them there. So I think that's the boldness that we're looking for. Even as a conservative, I say that's a good stand for Wake County and our non-certified.
Well, it's an investment. It's not, and this is what we forget. It's an investment more than it is an expenditure. Every study has shown that every dollar we spend, whether it's operating budget or capital budget, comes back at a rate that I don't know any investor that would turn down the kind of rates of return that we get for the dollars that we spend. So conservative, progressive, liberal, whatever you want to call it, it's an investment in our community. It will come back. It's a wise investment.
I agree. It's a very sound investment. So we have a lot of work to do.
And it has come back already. I mean,
It
Wake
has.
County is a phenomenal place to live. I mean, yes, there's absolutely always work that can be done, but I mean, overall, my goodness. So the decision that was made, in the late 60s and the early 70s clearly has benefited this county.
Mm-hmm.
In our community, ongoing commitment. Sure, thank you for reminding me my mic wasn't on. I was just restating the fact that, I mean, every time that we've had a bond, we're able to show the community the return on their investment. I mean, public schools are an institution that has immediate return on your investment. So if they give a dime as a school district, we're able to show them the direct impact of that. And not just by school buildings, but when businesses come, and every one of us who've been a school board chair while we're courting businesses, schools are engaged in that conversation because we are an asset to our community. So to your point, even during the toughest of times, our schools are one of the major components that makes Wake County a great place to work, live, and educate your children.
Looks like we're all on the same page. Anybody else?
Work ahead of us, that's what the page is.
Mm-hmm. That's a working document.
That's right.
Anybody else? Okay, good job. Thank you very much, Finance, and
Thank you.
everybody. And for board members, I don't see any other business in front of us unless somebody has any questions or wants to say something in particular off the agenda, which I'm always open for too. But otherwise, if no further business, we are adjourned. Thank you.